The 39 Steps by John Buchan. I returned from the city about 3 o'clock on that May afternoon in 1914, pretty well disgusted with life. I'd been 3 months in the old country and was fed up with it. "Richard Hannay," I kept telling myself, "you've got into the wrong ditch, my friend, and you'd better climb out." It made me bite my lips to think of the plans I had been building up those last years in Bulawayo. I'd got my pile, not one of the big ones, but good enough for me, and I'd figured out all kinds of ways of enjoying myself. My father had brought me out from Scotland at the age of 6, and I had never been home since, so England was a sort of Arabian Nights to me, and I counted on stopping there for the rest of my days. But from the first I was disappointed with it. In about a week I was tired of seeing sights, and in less than a month I had had enough of restaurants and theatres and race meetings. On my way home, I turned into my club. I had a long drink and read the evening papers. They were full of a row in the Near East, and there was an article about Karolides, the Greek premier. From all accounts, he seemed the one big man in the show, and he played a straight game too, which was more than could be said for most of them. I gathered that they hated him pretty blackly in Berlin and Vienna, but that we were going to stick by him, and one paper said that he was the only barrier between Europe and Armageddon. About 6 o'clock, I went home, dressed, and dined at the Café Royal, and turned into a musical. I did not stay long. The night was fine and clear as I walked back to the flat that I'd hired near Portland Place. My flat was on the first floor in a new block. There was a common staircase with a porter and a liftman at the entrance. I had a fellow to look after me who came in by the day. He arrived before 8 o'clock every morning and used to depart at 7, for I never dined at home. I was just fitting my key into the door when I noticed a man at my elbow. He was slim, with a short brown beard and small, gimlety blue eyes. I recognized him as the occupant of a flat on the top floor, with whom I had passed the time of day on the stairs. "Can I speak to you? May I come in for a minute?" He was steadying his voice with an effort. I got my door opened and motioned him in. "I'm very sorry," he said humbly. "It's a mighty liberty, but you look the kind of man who would understand. Say, will you do me a good turn?" "I'll listen to you," I said. "That's all I'll promise." There was a tray of drinks on the table beside him, from which he filled himself a stiff whisky and soda. He drank it off in 3 gulps, and cracked the glass as he set it down. "Pardon," he said, "I'm a bit rattled tonight. You see, I happen at this moment to be dead." A smile flickered over his drawn face. "I'm not mad, yet. Say, sir, I've been watching you, and I reckon you're a cool customer. I'm going to confide in you. I need help, and I want to know if I can count you in." I sat down in the armchair and lit my pipe. "Get on with your yarn," I said, "and I'll tell you." He was an American from Kentucky, and after college had started out to see the world. He wrote a bit and acted as war correspondent for a Chicago paper. Spent a year or 2 in southeastern Europe. I gathered that he was a fine linguist, and he got to know pretty well the society in those parts. I read him as a sharp, restless fellow who always wanted to get down to the roots of things. He got a little further down than he wanted. Away behind all the governments and the armies, he told me, there was a big subterranean movement going on, engineered by very dangerous people. He had come on it by accident. It fascinated him. He went further, and then he got caught. I gathered that most of the people in it were the sort of educated anarchists that make revolutions, but that beside them there were financiers who were playing for money. A clever man can make big profits on a falling market, and it suited the book of both classes to set Europe by the ears. The aim of the whole conspiracy was to get Russia and Germany at loggerheads. "I guess you know the name Konstantin Karolides?" he said. I nodded. He is the man who has wrecked all their games. He's the one big brain in the whole show, and he happens also to be an honest man. Therefore, he has been marked down these 12 months past. I found that out, not that it was difficult, for any fool could guess as much, but I found out the way that they were going to get him, and that knowledge was deadly. That's why I have had to decease. He had another drink. I mixed it for him myself. They can't get him in his own land, for he has a bodyguard of Epirots that would skin their grandmothers. But on the 15th day of June, he is coming to this city. The British Foreign Office has taken to having international tea parties, and the biggest of them is due on that date. Karolides is the principal guest, and if my friends have their way, he will never return to his country. You can warn him. Keep him at home, I said. And play their game? He asked sharply. If he does not come, they win, for he's the only man that can straighten out the tangle. And if his government are warned, he won't come, for he does not know how big the stakes will be on June the 15th. What about the British government, I said. Tip them the wink, and they'll take extra precautions. No good. They might stuff your city with plainclothes detectives and double the police, and Constantine would still be a doomed man. He'll be murdered by an Austrian, and there'll be plenty of evidence to show the connivance of the big folk in Vienna and Berlin. It will all be an infernal lie, of course, but the case will look black enough to the world. I'm not talking hot air, my friend. I happen to know every detail of the hellish contrivance, and it's not going to come off if there's a certain man who knows the wheels of the business alive right here in London on the 15th day of June, and that man is your servant, Franklin B. Scudder. I was getting to like the little chap. His jaw had shut like a rat trap, and there was the fire of battle in his gimlety eyes. "Where did you find out this story?" I asked. "I completed my evidence 10 days ago in Paris. I can't tell you the details now, but it's something of a history. When I was quite sure in my own mind, I judged it my business to disappear, and I reached this city by a mighty queer circuit. Till yesterday, I thought I had muddied my trail some, and I was feeling pretty happy. Then I saw a man standing in the street outside this block. I watched him for a bit from my window, and I thought I recognized him. He came in and spoke to the porter. The sheer naked scare on his face completed my conviction of his honesty. I asked him what he did next. I had to die. If my pursuers knew I was dead, they would go to sleep again. How did you manage it? I told the man that valets me that I was feeling pretty bad, and I got myself up to look like death. That wasn't difficult, for I'm no slouch at disguises. Then I got a corpse. You can always get a body in London if you know where to go for it. I fetched it back in a trunk on top of a four-wheeler, and I had to be assisted upstairs to my room. You see, I had to pile up some evidence for the inquest. I went to bed, and I got my man to mix me a sleeping draught, and then told him to clear out. When I was left alone, I started in to fake the corpse. He was my size, and I judged had perished from too much alcohol, so I put some spirits handy about the place. The jaw was the weak point in the likeness, so I blew it away with a revolver. I dare say there will be somebody tomorrow to swear having heard a shot, but there are no neighbors on my floor, and I guessed I could risk it. So I left the body in bed, dressed up in my pajamas, with a revolver lying on the bedclothes and a considerable mess around. I had had you in mind all day, and there seemed nothing to do but to make an appeal to you. I watched from my window till I saw you come in, and then slipped down the stair to meet you. "Hand me your key," I said, "and I'll take a look at the corpse. Excuse my caution, but I'm bound to verify a bit if I can." He shook his head mournfully. "I reckoned you'd ask for that, but I haven't got it. It's on my chain on the dressing table. I had to leave it behind, for I couldn't leave any clues to breed suspicions. The gentry who are after me are pretty bright-eyed citizens. You'll have to take me on trust for the night, and tomorrow you'll get proof of the corpse business right enough." I thought for an instant or two. "Right. I'll trust you for the night. I'll lock you into this room and keep the key. Just one word, Mr. Scudder. I believe you're straight, but if so be you are not, I should warn you that I'm a handy man with a gun." I woke next morning to hear my man Paddock making the deuce of a row at the smoking-room door. "Stop that row, Paddock," I said. "There's a friend of mine dossing down in there. Get breakfast for 2, and then come back and speak to me." I told Paddock a fine story about how my friend was a great swell, with his nerves pretty bad from overwork, who wanted absolute rest and stillness. Nobody had to know he was here. "Right, sir," said Paddock, and I knew I could count on his loyalty. I left Scudder with a newspaper and a box of cigars, and went down to the city to luncheon. When I got back, the liftman had an important face. "Nasty business here this morning, sir. Gent in number 15 been and shot himself. They've just took him to the mortuary. Police are up there now." I ascended to number 15 and found a couple of bobbies and an inspector making an examination. I asked a few idiotic questions, and they soon kicked me out. Then I found the man that had valeted Scudder and pumped him, but I could see he suspected nothing. I attended the inquest next day. The jury found it a case of suicide while of unsound mind, and the few effects were handed over to the American consul to deal with. I gave Scudder a full account of the affair. The first 2 days he stayed with me in that back room, he was very peaceful. He read and smoked a bit, and made a heap of jottings in a notebook, and every night we had a game of chess, at which he beat me hollow. He fixed up a list of the days till June the 15th, and ticked each off with a red pencil, making remarks in shorthand against them. I would find him sunk in a brown study, with his sharp eyes abstracted, and after those spells of meditation he was apt to be very despondent. One night he was very solemn. "Say, Hannay," he said, "I judge I should have let you a bit deeper into this business. I should hate to go out without leaving somebody else to put up a fight." And he began to tell me in detail what I had only heard from him vaguely. I remember that he was very clear that the danger to Karolides would not begin till he had got to London, and would come from the very highest quarters, where there would be no thought of suspicion. He mentioned the name of a woman, Julia Cecchini, as having something to do with the danger. She would be the decoy, I gathered, to get Karolides out of the care of his guards. He talked, too, about a black stone and a man that lisped in his speech, and he described very particularly somebody that he never referred to without a shudder, an old man with a young voice who could hood his eyes like a hawk. Next day he was much more cheerful. I went out to dinner with a mining engineer I had got to see on business, and came back about 10:30 in time for our game of chess. I pushed open the smoking-room door. The lights were not lit. I snapped the switch, but there was nobody there. Then I saw something in the far corner which made me drop my cigar and fall into a cold sweat. My guest was lying sprawled on his back. There was a long knife through his heart, which skewered him to the floor.